just a minute. We're in a staring competition. We're trying not to blink. Me and Chuck. He hasn't blinked yet. Neither have I. My eyes are starting to hurt. Chuck, blink. Blink. Oh, I lost. Chuck, you always win at a staring competition. You like that, don't you? Yeah! Oh, he's happy. Well, look. We know how important blinking is for our eyes, because if we don't, our eyes get super dry. In fact, it's healthy for us. Well, in today's lesson, we're going to be talking about Daniel and how Daniel saw another important thing in his life that he did every day, and that was prayer. And when someone told him that he couldn't pray, he said, "Nah, it's healthy. I've got to continue to do it anyways." And just like blinking is good for us, I'm not sure how Chuck goes so long without doing it. So is prayer good for us? And that's what we're going to be talking about today's story. I'm glad to have you here. Sorry we started in a stare competition, but before we go too much further, Chuck, you're going to have to go away. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, he's a little sad. He's got to go, but that's okay. He can come back later, okay? All right, let me put you in your cage. Okay. We have a really cool craft today. It's really neat. This is what it's going to be looking like, and you can actually add some color to it. We got some flippy flappies right here, okay? And do all sorts of, we haven't had anything like that yet, but we'll talk about that when it comes to it. So you will have your packet that will come in the same email. It's going to have the materials you need for the craft. It's going to have some coloring sheets. It'll have some other items that I think you'll find fun. For the craft, you really only need two things. You need a glue stick or some type of glue, and you need scissors. Glue stick, scissors, okay? Scissors for the cutting, obviously not the pasting, and then glue for the gluing. Throwing my scissors here. It's a crazy day. All right, but before we go too much further, we're going to have Caleb step in, and he's going to do our time with prayer.
Well, boys and girls, thank you guys so much for joining us back this week. Thank you, Pastor Jamie, for that introduction. Loved it every time. For prayer, we have not gotten any prayer requests, but as always, I would like to continue to ask that you would send prayer requests in because we love hearing them. So let's get right into our prayer this week. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for giving us another week to learn from your word and to learn from Pastor Jamie. Father, I pray for Chuck Lane as he has his surgery, or had his surgery. I pray that he would have a quick recovery, Lord, just help him to feel right back to normal. Father, I also pray for the Neum family as they're having a child on Friday, and it's such an amazing thing to have, to bring life into this world, Lord. And I pray that for Rachel's health and everything would just go smoothly. Father, I also pray for the church and that people would still want to be a part of it and not become lazy and just go along with the moves. Father, I also pray for the sick and that you would just heal this country of all the coronavirus patients and that everything would just go back to normal. Father, I also pray for the lesson today and that Pastor Jamie would just love to teach the word to everyone and that we would learn from it and put it into good use in our personal lives. Father, I pray this in your Holy Son's name. Amen.
Well, boys and girls, it's time for our lesson. And I think this is an important record to remember. You know, people set records all the time. We have a book called the Guinness Book of World Records. And it's people doing things that are typically can be pretty hard to do, but they're committed to doing them. This is a story of one man that the record for the most consecutive days running at least 1 mile, so running every day at least 1 mile, was 16,436 days. If you were to add all that up, that's actually 45 years straight without missing a day of running a mile. This person, this California cross-country coach, was so committed to this record that he reportedly ran on a broken foot, through 3 surgeries, the removal of his wisdom teeth, and kidney stones. Kidney stones. He was committed to this record. And so we think of being committed to something, we think we're going to give it our all, even if it's difficult and things get in our way, like this man did, to make sure he ran a mile at least every day. Boys and girls, we're going to be looking at Daniel and see what he's committed to. And we need to judge what we're committed to. What are the things that we're unwilling to give up? What are the things we're going to make sure we do every day? I mean, I hope one of the things you're committed to is brushing your teeth. It's good for you, it's good for those around you, it's good to keep your teeth healthy. Maybe you're committed to taking baths and showers. That's good. You know, people around you will appreciate you staying clean. So we're going to be committed to things, but hopefully you're committed more than just things that keep you clean. You'll be committed to reading God's Word and praying to Him. And we're going to look at how Daniel was committed to doing that. I'm going to read to you starting, this is in Daniel 6, and we're going to be starting in verse 1. So Daniel 6, verse 1. And it says, It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom. Now, a satrap was kind of this under-ruler, right? So he would advise the king, but he would also help co-rule. Like we have a president would be kind of the head guy, and then you have governors, or even the president's staff that help him out. And so this is what he would have these satraps that would help the king. And they were throughout the whole kingdom. And over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one. So over these 120 other smaller rulers, there were 3 guys that were over all them. And Daniel was one of those 3. And then it says here, and Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Verse 3. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps. So even among those 3, he became the chief of the 3, because of an excellent spirit was in him. So because he listened to God, worshiped God, God blessed him and put him not just over the 120 other satraps, they put him over the other 3 rulers too that were under the king. And so it says here in verse 4, Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was in him. So they didn't like to have Daniel over them. So they tried to find some sort of dirt, something that could hurt Daniel, that they could tell the king, so that Daniel would get removed, right? It was sneaky, it was bad. But Daniel was committed to worshiping God. This is the same Daniel that said, hey, I don't want to eat meat that's been dedicated to your false gods. I'll eat vegetables. That's earlier in Daniel. And so he was committed to doing whatever it took to worship God daily. Okay, he was faithful to do that. And so it says, but they couldn't find any fault because he worshiped God. He was an honest man. Verse 5, Then these men said, We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. Because they knew that he was committed to worshiping God, and that he would break the king's law before he would break his commitment to God. Boys and girls, don't you think we ought to be like that? I think we ought to consider, I think we ought to be more willing to break our commitments on this earth with people than we are to break our commitments with God. That doesn't mean it gives us a license to, or an excuse to not be honest. But what it means is that when men and people or things in this world require us to not be committed to God, we ought to put those things aside and stay committed to God. Let's keep going with our story. Verse 6. Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. They're buttering him up. I bet some of you have gone to mom or dad and you said, oh, you're just the best mom and dad. Right before you ask for the thing you want, right? And that's what these guys were doing. Verse 7, All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors, are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. And so basically they also come and say, look, everyone thinks this is a good idea. We try to use that tactic too, right? And so we exaggerate. We say, everyone thinks we ought to do this. The whole family agrees we ought to go get ice cream. Well, we should go get a special treat. And so they're trying to not only help him, butter him up, but show him, hey, if you disagree with us, you're going to be the only one in the wrong. Because everyone thinks this is a good idea. So don't be foolish and say this is a bad idea. So they're setting up his mind, this manipulation. Boys and girls, another lesson that we take out of the Old Testament is to learn there are things that we should not repeat in our own lives just because it's written in the Scriptures. And that's how these guys acted. We shouldn't try to be manipulative when we want something. That's sin. That's wrong. God's not honored by that. We should be honest. And if we're told no, we need to be thankful for what God has given us. And so let's keep looking. It says, now king established the injunction and signed the document. They want to come up with a law that said, hey, if anyone worships any god except for you, O king, then they'd be thrown into the den of lions where they would get eaten up. Okay, where they would surely die. And so now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and the injunction. I mean, he was set up. And so we see that these bad men are setting a trap to catch Daniel. Now, let's go to our next part here. This is going to be verses 10 through 18. So what is Daniel going to do? Is he going to stop praying to God? That'd be the easy thing to do, right? He wouldn't get in trouble. But they knew Daniel was faithful to pray to God. And he wasn't going to stop. He was going to follow God over men. And so Daniel in verse 10, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. He was committed, just like the man who ran over a mile, at least a mile every day for 45 years. He was committed to God. Even though this law could kill him, he says, nope, I'm going to follow God over man. I'm going to respect God more than I am people. Boys and girls, there's a thing called peer pressure. And that's what was happening to King Darius here, where people around you can say, oh no, you ought to do this sin. You ought to do this bad thing. It's okay. Everyone does it. It's going to benefit you to do this. And so you kind of get talked into sinning or doing this bad thing, and you shouldn't do it. Here, he says, hey, you ought to respect God more than you do the opinions of men. Don't fear men, fear God. Respect him as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And so it goes in, it says, so he prayed and he gave thanks before God as he had done previously. So he prayed 3 times a day before. He's still praying 3 times a day now. And so verse 11, then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. So they said, hey king, let's go find this guy. I think we found someone. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. He said, yeah, I've done that. And it can be changed. Exactly. You're right. And so verse 13, when they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Basically, he prays to God. Petitions is a fancy word for praying. He prays to God 3 times a day. This is Daniel. Daniel was around 80 years old at the time. He was an older man. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. He felt bad about it. He said, what can we do? And you can imagine all those other rulers and those bad guys are thinking, this is a law that can't be changed. Don't forget it. It can't be altered. It's got to happen. We've got both the king and we have Daniel. The king can't save his friend. And it says that king labored till the sun went down to figure out a way basically to rescue Daniel. Verse 15, then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. You can't rescue him. He's going to have to go. Because they were selfish, bad men. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of the lions. Then the king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." And you can imagine Daniel being 80 years old. I mean, and you can imagine the king thinking, this is scary for him. And this is kind of what this may have looked like, him being thrown into the den of lions. But Darius really cared for his friend. And so, the king, Darius did. And it says, then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the lions. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God whom you serve continue to deliver you." Verse 17, and a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet, with the signet of the Lord's, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. He was broken over his respected friend being eaten by the lions. He just could imagine the lions chomping on his bones. It wasn't good. And he even said, "I pray that your God really is real and that he would save you." So, the law wasn't compromised, but God doesn't have to follow the law or the laws of nature. The only law he has to follow is his own character. He's good, and so he has to remain good. He defines the good, not us. And so here in verse 19 it says, "Then at the break of the day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, 'O Daniel, servant of the living God, has the God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions?' Then Daniel said to the king, 'O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth. And they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him and also before you. O king, I have done no harm.' Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in God. And the king commanded that those who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they and their children and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones to pieces." So these bad men were fed to the lions instead, because the king was not pleased with them. But God shut the mouths of the lions and kept them from eating him. They were obviously hungry because they ate those other people. But God shut the mouths of the lions because Daniel was faithful. That doesn't mean, boys and girls, that we always get what we want when we're obedient to God. It doesn't mean that. But it does mean one thing, and we're going to see what that means. It means every time we're faithful to God, something does happen. Let's look in verse 25. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed." He's talking about the God of the Scriptures. "And his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions." So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Boys and girls, obedience means God is glorified. And we understand that with God being glorified, that's the best situation for us. Glorifying God is what we've been made to do. So that is a promise. Every time we're obedient, God is glorified. And God tells us that's what's best for us. Now remember, it doesn't mean you're obedient, you get whatever you want. No, you get what's best for you, which is God being glorified and blessing you out of his glory. And it's important. So the lesson we ought to remember is we ought to be dedicated, committed to God, just like Daniel was daily. Let me ask you, are you committed to reading God's word and to talking to him every day? We ought to be just as committed as the man who ran for 45 years. Why? So we can glorify our God. We can glorify Jesus Christ, who went to the cross and who was obedient and glorified the Father, and going to the cross taking the punishment for our sin, the things we think, say, or do that don't please God. God says, hey, the sin has to be purged, has to be punished. And that was purged on Christ. And not only do we have our sin record purged, we get Christ's record of a perfect life, because he never sinned. And so, boys and girls, we get his record of holiness, he gets our record of sinfulness. So that if we trust that Jesus is who he says he is, and we repent of seeking after our own glory, like those bad rulers did, to make much of themselves. So they didn't like Daniel being made much of. They wanted much to be made of themselves. They wanted to be important. And so if we repent of that, we say, I don't want that anymore, I want to turn to making much of God, then you can be saved. Trusting that Jesus is who he says he is, and he did what he said he did. If you have any questions or want to talk about that further, please feel free to contact me or someone here at Grace Harvest. That's our story for today. I hope it's been helpful for you. All right, for today's craft, we talked about Daniel praying 3 times a day. Okay? And so here we have a clock, and hopefully most of you are used to a clock, and if you pick up these flaps, you can find Daniel, pictures of Daniel praying the 3 different times a day. So this is a good reminder to us to be committed to God. If he can pray to God 3 times a day and his life is at stake, how often are you praying to God? So this can be a helpful activity that reminds us. The verse on it is out of Daniel 6:10. It says, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before God as he had done previously. He immediately goes out and obeys, even though it's going to be difficult. So what we're going to start off with is you're going to get again, scissors and glue. Now feel free to color that. I think it would really help. But anyways, for the sake of today's, you would take and cut out the circle here. Now, because I know this would take a while, we are going to use our special TV powers. And already cut out. So you're going to want to cut out the circle, and then what you're going to want to do is come and cut slits where the lines are. Okay? So you should have 3 flaps. And then you're also going to want to cut out the clock hands. Okay? Now, what I would encourage you to do is then, once we have those cut out, we're going to put some glue on the back of our circle. Now, what's really important is these small wedges, you don't want to put glue on the back of those. We want the flaps to be able to come up. So, you can see, I'm going to put glue everywhere except those wedges. I've got a spare sheet of paper down here in case I get a little messy. Okay. And then when that's done, I'm going to bring it over here. I'm going to line up the 12 at the top. Like so. I'm going to press it down. Okay. Now I'm going to put some glue on the back of my clock hands. I'm going to use my sheet of paper here. And just going to... Now you can kind of put the clock hands where you want, but you don't want to put them so that they're over any of your flaps, really, that lift up. I mean, I guess it may not matter a huge amount, but I'm going to put one right about here. Like so, and then I'm going to move another one over here. Okay. And we'll put this one over here, pointing at, let's say, 10 o'clock. The 10. Okay. And so that's it for today's lesson. And then as a good reminder, we can look and see, hey, Daniel's praying at these different times. It's a reminder for us, how often are we and how committed are we to knowing God? So that's our craft for today. Well, Chuck, that was a good lesson today. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thought, that it was a great reminder that we need to be committed to the God that has been committed to sending his son to die for us, right? Yeah. What is something you're committed to, Chuck? Playing fetch and catching ball and chasing cats. Yeah, I understand. Well, those sound like things you're quite committed to. but we ought to be committed to Christ because of what he's done for us. Boys and girls, I pray that we be like Daniel. Daniel? Yeah, Daniel. Oh, yeah, he was very committed praying. Yeah, he was. And we ought to be like Daniel and committed to talking and knowing God better. So I hope the lesson this week encourages you, challenges you, and points you to Christ. So from Chuck and I, we say goodbye and have a great week.